Hello and welcome to West Indies on 99.94 Cricket every day. My name is Mashal St. Patrick Hewitt, one half of the Caribbean Cricket Podcast, and with me as ever is my co-host Antoki Nagilendram. We are West Indies on 99.94 and we are your home for West Indies content, and we'll be dropping into your podcast feed on YouTube or the 99.94 app 3 times every week. Thanks for joining Cricket's conversation. Today on West Indies on 99.94, we're going to be talking about the faltering Trinbago Knight Riders dynasty. Santoki, take it away.
Yeah, Mash, as you said, we're going to look at the first and still only dynasty in the CPL, the Trinbago Knight Riders, and ask, is it the end of this much heralded dynasty? Now, to give some context, in 2020, the Trinbago Knight Riders went on an unprecedented run in franchise cricket. They won all 12 of their games in the CPL to win the tournament. Now, this had a lot of people talking on social media about whether they were the strongest franchise in world cricket across leagues. And that sort of highlights just how talented the side were and how it looked like they built a dynasty long-term for years to come. However, 2021, they managed to top the group stages, but incurred 4 losses during that run and then lost in the semi-finals to the St. Lucia Kings, which was a shock. And 2022 now, we've seen them really struggle in the group stages. Despite bringing in star power such as Dre Ross and Nicholas Pooran, they've sort of struggled. And we're going to focus on what have been the issues, who's been missing, and what has caused this sort of downturn in fortunes for the Trinbago Knight Riders. So, Mash, I guess it's only right to look at the top of the order. Now, this season, they went for a big gamble. They've gone for Sunil Narayan as a pinch hitting opener. So he's someone who's given a license to go from ball 1. If he gets out for a first ball duck, so be it. And they partnered in with Tion Webster, who's 27 years old, but only really plays CPL cricket. So he's very inexperienced in terms of world franchise cricket. Now, this hasn't come off. We've seen them both lose their wickets very early in the power play, and they've drafted in Nicholas Pooran to open with Tion Webster. So I guess compared to previous years, one big player who's missing from the ranks is Lendl Simmons. Now, he's someone in 2020, during that famous run, he partnered with Tion Webster, Amir Jangu, Sunil Narayan, and just his experience and ability to play the situation meant he could carry his innings and score big runs despite playing with inexperienced opening partners. And Mash, you feel without Lendl Simmons as that rock at the top of the order, it's sort of caused a domino effect within the batting lineup this year for the Trinbago Knight Riders.
Yeah, most definitely. And I think before we get into Simmons and his loss, I think what the struggles of this season have shown for Trinbago is what happens when you don't, let's call it succession plan properly, or you don't construct your roster properly. Because let's have it right. Tion Webster has not done enough in preceding seasons to justify getting a spot at the top of the order. That's not me trying to say that Tion Webster's a bad player. I'm just saying that it was as you called it, Santoki, it was a gamble. Well, I would love to know behind the scenes in the think tank, I would love to know why they thought that Tion was the right person to go to. Now, his age notwithstanding, because of course we can say he's 27 years old and he's supposed to be experienced, but you and I well know, Santoki, that until you get to about 30 in West Indies cricket, you're not actually experienced in West Indies cricket. So I don't really look at his age and say he should be better than he is at this particular point in time. I just don't think he's ready for the level of responsibility. But then Pollard and co might say, well, how would we know unless we gave him this opportunity this season? Because the easiest thing to do would have been to say, yeah, let's go with a Lendl Simmons again and a tried and trusted, or with Sunil Narayan or a Dinesh Ramdin or whatever it might be. But fundamentally, you've hit the nail on the head, Santoki. Their top order, and arguably we could go from 1 through to 6, just hasn't fired. And I think when you end up in a situation where you're asking the West Indies captain to now pinch hit at the top of the order, which isn't a position, I'm trying to think if I've ever seen Pooran play that position. And then I want to throw this to you, actually, Santoki. Yes, it's a franchise tournament, and yes, it's win by any means necessary. But with the World Cup on the horizon, should the West Indies captain be pinch hitting at the top of the order for his franchise because they got their team construction wrong. Note as well, so much to say, sorry, Santoki. Note as well, he's not even been playing at 3 this season, which is where he's likely to play for West Indies. He's been coming down at like number 5, number 6, and now he's opening. So again, all of this points to not getting team construction right from the very beginning. And now they're having to play catch up, trying to find a way to muddle their way through to the final 4.
Yeah, I had those exact thoughts, Mash. I think they've essentially sacrificed Pooran's build-up for the World Cup. Obviously, the CPL's franchise are separate, a distinct entity from West Indian cricket team, but you'd like to think they would work together to sort of have this consistency. And I think it's surprising that Kieran Pollard, obviously knowing how important it is for Pooran to get into groove before the World Cup, has kind of let him bat as an opener, as a pinch hitting opener. And you feel this could be detrimental for him going into the World Cup. If he's had a run of games playing as pinch hitting opener, then he's got to come in at bat at number 3 in Australia. He hasn't had that preparation, but I guess that sort of highlights the desperation for the franchise. They need to win at the end of the day. That's their remit, to win the CPL. So they've gone for Nicholas Pooran, an experienced batsman. We know he's talented enough to open. We know he can bat in any position. So it's not ideal from a West Indies point of view, but from a franchise point of view, they've probably gone for the best option they can at the top of the order. But like you said, Michelle, it rings down probably all the way down to number 6. We've also seen their overseas guys, Tim Seifert and Colin Monroe, who have usually been stalwarts. They've sort of underperformed this season. And I guess that's also the risk with overseas players. You never really know what you're getting, if they will hit their form of previous years. So I think their middle order has certainly created some holes, and they've been trying to fill them with Pollard and Dre Russ coming in earlier than normal. But Mash, let's talk about Dre Russ though. So he was a marquee signing for them this year. For a lot of fans, they thought that was guaranteed Trinbago would win the CPL title with Andre Russ coming in, along with Nicholas Pooran. You've obviously been covering a few more Trinbago games than myself. How have you seen it as an observer, Andre Russell fitting into this side?
So first things first, this has been like one of the most protracted transfers in CPL history. Everyone essentially expected Dre Russ to go to TKR last season, and he stuck around with the Talawars for one more year after dropping a diss track on the Talawars via Instagram a couple of seasons back. So he's got his move. He's transferred across to TKR to do the KKR TKR link up, which makes sense in many senses. But again, I mean, okay, the positives are he has contributed with the ball. He was a big part of bowling TKR to victory against Guyana. So we can't pretend he's had a horrible CPL. And as we record this, he was part of the winning chase against his former franchise, the Jamaica Talawars. But again, I'm gonna give Dre Russ a bit of slack here, cut him a bit of slack. Because if you look through the 7 games TKR have played so far, he's been coming in too early. And yes, people can say, well, he's got to adapt. He's a better player than just somebody who can only succeed in the back 5. But again, Santoki, not to reiterate the point, team construction is there for a reason. When they signed Andre Russell, surely the point of signing him was your role, Dre Russ, is to be a finisher. You're going to come in at the back end with 5 or 6 overs to go, do what you do, and you'll also contribute probably 2 overs here, 3 overs there, take some crucial wickets, etc., right? He's done that from the bowling perspective, but if you look at the 7 games, how often has he been able to come in and fulfill his remit per the team construction? If you've got Andre Russell coming in before over number 10 because so many wickets have fallen, I'm not sure how much you can blame him if it's not coming off. Yes, he should play the situation. Yes, he shouldn't just slog and give his wicket away, which is done maybe twice or so in the tournament. But how much can you blame Dre Russ if the top order aren't doing their job? Do you follow where I'm coming from?
Yeah, 100%. I think Dre Russ, at this stage in his career, you know what you're getting. You know what you expect from him. And that's for him to come in the last 4 or 5 overs, blast the ball. If you need 60 runs off the last 4 overs, Dre Russ is the man to come in. at this stage in his career, to expect him to come at 10 and over number 10 or 11, whilst he can do that because he's a talented player, you're not getting the best out of him. So again, that points to what you said at the top of the show, Mash. It's about strategy and management. How are they managing this team and how are they trying to get the best out of them? We've essentially got one of the most talented middle order batsmen in the region, Nicholas Pooran, opening as a pinch hitter, and we've got Dre Russ coming in by the 10th over to try and rotate strike and play singles, which is not what his selling point is. So for me, it's just a bad mismanagement of players. Do you think Kieran Pollard has anything? Would you blame Kieran Pollard for this, or do you think it goes beyond him in sort of the pressures to win the franchise? It's just got them scrambling in terms of trying to fit the players into the side.
Do you remember when we did the episode on Brian Lara and I said, who's Abhishek? I said, who's Abhishek Nair? Listen, all I know is my man has been given an all-star lineup and TKR scrambling to try and make the final four. So although I'm kind of joking, I have to ask the question again. Who is Abhishek Nair? Now, last time I asked, people were quick to come into my mentions and say, well, actually, he's assistant head coach for KKR and he's well respected. I hear all that. But Santoki, if I was given that TKR side and I was struggling to make the final four with that TKR side, questions must be asked. They have to be asked because the talent collection is too much to be scrambling around. And even now, as we record, TKR in third place, but there is absolutely no guarantee that they're going to make the final four. They're still likely to have to win. They got 3 games left. Mate, one win might scrape them through, but probably they're going to need 2 if you see out of the final 3. So it should never have got to this stage. So that's that's the coach. But then if I look at Pollard, where Pollard will have to take some criticism, not necessarily in his captaincy, because I still see his aggressive captaincy. I still see him trying things. I still see him trying to galvanize his troops in spite of the failures. Where Pollard will have to take some criticism is his own personal form, but he's not alone. He's not alone. In fact, let me bring up some stats. So I'm going to just go through the top 6. Colin Munro has played 5 matches. He's got 124 runs. Tim Seifert, 7 matches, 105 runs. Pooran, 7 matches, 92 runs. Webster, 7 matches, 81 runs. Narain, 7 matches, 73 runs. Russell, 7 matches, 55 runs. Pollard, 7 matches, 54 runs. That's the batting lineup. None of them are doing anything, Santoki. It's only Colin Munro, and even that in the last 2 matches, who has actually shown up what I guess you could call consistently with the bat. But you've got Pooran, Webster, Narain, Russell, Pollard, all scoring less than 100 runs aggregate in 7 matches. So as much as I can look at Pollard, what can a captain? It's like a West Indies scenario, Santoki. What can a captain realistically do if so many players are out of form? I'm not sure how much can your captaincy make an impact if that I've literally basically called the whole top 7. If no one's really firing, you can't really narrow that down on the captain per se, because each person's got to look at their individual game and say, well, what's going on? But here's the thing. If TKR do scrape into the final 4, I still think nobody would want to play them, Santoki, because when you have that construction of individual talent, irrespective of them not really clicking as a team, all it ever takes is one of them to really come off on any given day. And they've won their last 2 games, albeit not necessarily without problems. But is there a case, Santoki, where we say they're finding form, albeit scratchy form, at the right time? Because it's the teams that go into the final 4 with form that tend to be the ones that reach the final, as opposed to the ones who start strong.
Yes, it's a good point, Mash, because we saw them on the reverse end of that last season when St. Lucia Kings sort of powered through in the semi-final, scored over 200 and just had that momentum. I think it's an interesting one because previously, before last year, the majority of CPL finals were held in Trinidad for that last week. So they had that fan momentum. So it'd be interesting to see whether this is an artificial high for the side. Playing in front of a home crowd has given them a bit of form. And when they go to Guyana, if they can keep that momentum up for the final week, because it will be the first time where they've had to play a final week in Guyana. And obviously the crowd will be very hostile against them. So that will obviously play a factor. And as you said, it is a concern that we've got the West Indies captain averaging 15. I think his strike rate's 116 at the moment for the Trinbago Knight Riders ahead of a World Cup. So for me, it's just, if you look at that top 7 you named, we've got Tion Webster in there, Sunil Narayan. I just think in terms of player retention or player signings, they could have done with someone like a Ramdin or a Bravo, just an experienced local player who could kind of come in and calm down the situation when wickets were falling. And they just seem to lack that because, as we said, Narayan's someone who will go from ball one, whether he's batting as an opener or batting 5 or 6. So you can't really count him as a top 6, top 7 batsman, which is what they've done. So for me as well, it points to player retention, and that goes above Pollard. It's obviously, as you said, the head coach Nayar and the franchise as itself. You feel they haven't recruited enough, but maybe that's because they just place such high hopes on Poor and Andreas taking them over the line mash. But we focused on the batting. Now let's focus on the bowling. I think it'd be wrong to say that Trinbago has been completely at fault because they've had some issues, injuries to Ali Khan was ruled out of the season. So they've had to draft in Ravi Rampal, who wasn't in the original squad in the auction. And Hakil Hussain obviously missed 3 games with an injury. So those have been big blows. But Mash, I guess if you could judge it in comparison to the batting, the bowling has still held up pretty well. The bowlers are doing their side, particularly Ravi Rampal. We've seen Du Pavilion, the South African bowler. Akil Hussain's come back and gotten the wicket. So for me, I guess it's fair to say the bowling has held up its side of the deal.
Yeah, 100%. And if we call some kind of stats and facts about it, Rampal's got 9 wickets, economy 9.25. 9 wickets at 16. Hussain has got only 3 matches, but 8 wickets at an average of 9, economy 6. And Narayan, 7 wickets, an average of 15, economy 4. Du Pavilion, 5 wickets, at an average of 20, economy 6.53. Even Dre Russ, 4 wickets at 31, economy under 10 as well. So the bowling has performed. And actually, what we should probably unpick, Santoki, is Akil Hussain's only played 3 matches, the first one and the last 2, and they've won every single match that Akil's been part of, right? All the matches that Akil got injured for, they've lost, or it was rained out. I think it was 1 rain out and 3 losses, right? So, and when you look at those 3 matches, Akil Hussain is effectively their top wicket taker because he's taken 8 wickets in only 3 matches. Rampal's got 9 wickets in 6. Narayan's got 7 in 7. But as you and I discussed before, Narayan's role is different. He's not necessarily a wicket taker. But Narayan becomes more effective in conjunction with Akil Hussain.
Yeah.
Rather than Narayan on his own. And I think there were some matches earlier in the tournament where you kind of saw Narayan do his 4 overs for pretty much nothing. So a classic Narayan return is like 4 overs, 1 for 19. But without an Akil Hussain to be the strike spin bowler, it was asking too much of the remaining bowlers to then take the wickets. So I think it's no coincidence for me that as soon as Akil has come back to add that dynamic strike bowling option alongside Narayan, we saw what happened to the Amazon Warriors. They were scrambling against Narayan and Akil. And then we saw what happened to the Talawars, scrambling again. Rampal then showed up as well. So the bowling's held up, but I also think we must acknowledge that Akil Hussain has his absence, maybe unbalanced. Is unbalanced the right word? Maybe weaken the side more significantly than people have taken into account. And yes, people say, but that doesn't mean anything with regards to the batting. Yes, I hear that, but check this, Santoki. Trinbago's batting can afford to falter if you have Akil Hussain and Sunil Narayan bowling. It can't afford to falter if you're down 1. He's the number 1 ODI bowler in the West Indies and across. In fact, globally, he was in the top 2 or 3. I think it might even be number 1 in white ball cricket in the last year. So that's a major absence, and I don't think it's one we can understate.
Yeah, 100%. And it's interesting because at one point in 2019, 2020, Kari Pierre and Akil Hussein were sort of on the same level. You thinking either one of them could make the West Indies side. We've seen Akil Hussein sort of be elevated, whereas Pierre, he's been brought in Akil's absence and hasn't really been able to live up. So it's interesting to see the parallel between the two Trinidadian spinners, obviously both good friends. Akil Hussein sort of elevated himself, whereas Pierre sort of found himself out of form. And that means Trinbago haven't had the depth to replace Akil Hussein in terms of a wicket taking spinner, and that's affected them. But I guess as you alluded to before with Pollard essentially giving Webster a chance to try and help him kind of blood in, get the experience. They've also tried out Sharon Lewis as well in the pace department, someone who Ian Bishop said has performed well in club cricket across Trinidad. So they are still trying to blood in new players, Trinidadian youngsters into the side to try and get them experience. But you just feel at the moment, Mash, it's all it's all on a tightrope coming into this final week of group games. You don't know what's going to happen. They could go to Guyana and find themselves eliminated from the playoffs, and that's not what we expect from Trinbago. We normally expect them to steamroll the group opposition and coast their way to the semi-finals. So I guess to kind of end the show, Mash, do you think this is the end of the Trinbago dynasty as we know it? Do you think that they'll sort of be able to pick themselves up, or is this a decline and it will need a massive overhaul of the squad to kind of rebuild from scratch?
What I'm going to equate it to, Santoki, and I want you to answer this. Every year when Guyana, so I'm going to, in order to answer this, I have to talk about the Amazon Warriors. Every year when Guyana made it to the final, right? The team construction was relatively, you knew what you were getting, right?
Yeah.
You knew you were getting Malik, you knew you were getting Hafiz, and you knew that Guyana were going to spin teams out, and then you'd have the explosiveness of like a Hetmar and a Puran in between the experienced wise heads of Malik and Hafiz. Cool. And then they would always falter at the final finish line. Now, as much as Guyana faltered using that strategy, that also brought them success. Yeah, well, it was success in a certain sense. At some point, though, you have to look at it and say how much success is success. So faltering at the finish line, is that success or is it not? How much can they still keep going with Malik and Hafiz and so on and so forth? Or even Imran Tahir, at what point do you rip up the script? Yeah. I just wonder with TKR if we're getting to a point where they need to rip up the script. Now, yes, they've bought in. People could say, well, Mash, they've bought in Puran, they've bought in Russell. That is them ripping up the script. But actually, the squad is still, like, the faces are still familiar. Do you know what I mean? There's still Pollard. There's still Rampal. There's still Colin Munro. There's still Tim Seafer. Tion Webster's still there. Sunil Ryan's still there. Like, at least 8 of the 11 are just players who always play for TKR. And every dynasty reaches a point where, think of like Alex Ferguson at Manchester United. He would always refresh his squad every what 3, 4, 5 years. There'd be a new cycle of refreshing the squad, and I just wonder if, and it's going to sound silly because Munro and Cypher effectively have done better than the home base players, right? But I just wonder if they have to switch things up now and go for a different set of overseas players, for example. Do you catch my drift? Like, or the alternative is, do they do what the Talawars have done, which is make TKR more TKR? And by that I mean, do they go all out next season, give Evan Lewis the big bag, and bring him into the TKR fold? What do you say, Santoki?
Yeah, I think the strategy so far for TKR has been to have Trinidadian players at its core. So with them needing an experienced opener, it would not shock me if they did sign Evan Lewis to try and, essentially, if we're talking about football, they're essentially like Real Madrid. They try to get the Galacticos in. So you'd imagine every year they'll try and sign a massive player. This year it was Jay Russ and Puram. Next year you can imagine to fill in that gap, maybe for Webster, they'll bring in an Evan Lewis for that experience. But I just think, because they've never had radical changes in the side, I just think they'll keep at it for next season at least and just try and make 1 or 2 additions. But as you said, Colin Munro and Tim Seifert, they're leading the run scoring charts, but it's still been underwhelming from them. It's not been exceptional. So you feel maybe 2 fresh overseas players could add some impetus into that middle order. So it'd be interesting to see what they do. And obviously in the pace department, Ravi Rampal, he's coming up to 38 years old. You can't expect him to perform year on year after this. So they'll need to obviously Jaden Sills has been injured this season, so he hasn't been able to play as much as he wants. You'd like to see Anderson Phillips step in. So it'd be interesting to see kind of where they go in terms of their bowling as well to replace Van Poole, because he's been such a key figurehead for like the past 10 years for the Trinbago Knight Riders, really taking wickets. So there's a lot to think about, and I think a lot of it will depend on how they finish this season. If they win the title, they essentially paper over the cracks. They don't need to reform massively next year. If they crash out in the group stages, then that could be the spark which forces them to radically change and try and build Trinbago Knight Riders 2.0, the new dynasty for the next 5-6 years. So I guess if you're a fan of Trinbago, if they lost in the group stages long term, it probably wouldn't be the worst scenario, because you would probably see them be galvanized into building a more long-term strategy, whereas a win, they'd probably keep the same team for next year and struggle next year anyway. So a lot to think about, Mash, but I think it's safe to say with the core of the side, Russell, Pollard, Rampal, and Narayan coming to their mid to late 30s, it is probably the end of the dynasty as we know it. And they've sort of been a side which, as I said, the first and only dynasty from CPL, one of the great franchises. And I think they've sort of led a mark in terms of innovation and style on world franchise cricket.
Yeah, most definitely. And we'll see how outdated this episode ends up being, because for all we know, TKR will win again. And that when it comes to winner takes all matches, maybe that's when they show up in the clutch. And then the narrative will be written. It'll be like, see, this is why they're a champion side, because they show up in the clutch and so on and so forth. But I think that would be a short-term reaction. As Santoki says, it would be a short-term reaction to some clear, obvious cracks that exist within the franchise. So it'll be interesting to see if the think tank behind the scenes are already wondering about what they do for CPL 2023. But ladies and gentlemen, if you love the language of cricket and want more, then please do head over to the 99.94 app, and you can hear all our podcasts and cricket commentary as well. We're always adding new shows covering cricket series from all over the world. Santoki, it's goodbye from me. Is it goodbye from you?
Yeah, it's goodbye from me. And obviously, if you've liked this episode, like, comment, subscribe to 99.94. And we'll be back in the coming days with more analysis of CPL franchises as the tournament reaches its conclusion. So stay locked, guys.
Indeed, indeed.